everyone ready? A parent extremely concerned for their child's safety is probably going to be the worst and most emotional actor in this debate. A few things I want to do today. First, go through some framing on what serious medical situations look like and compare it between medical professionals and family. And second, I want to go through a practical argument before moving on to my principle on why parents do not necessarily always get a say in their children's medical situation. So I want to start with framing on what a serious medical situation looks like. I think it probably means one of three things. First, this situation is literally life or death, right? It's extremely lethal, and probably if we don't take immediate action, the child will die. Or second, it means that there's likely going to be very long-term effects to whatever the situation is, right? We tell you then, under this, parents might not be able to actually understand what these effects are going to be and how to handle them. But third, I think the last situation in which constitutes a medical emergency is likely going to be children having disabilities that parents cannot necessarily account for. I think this looks like, for example, a child having autism or something, but their parents don't actually understand how to deal with it and how to care for them. Second, I want to talk about what these medical professionals look like. We think medical professionals are still held liable to a large extent, right? I think parents are still able to tell medical professionals that what they're doing is not, they're still able to petition these medical professionals to say what they're doing is not necessarily the best. And I think second, they're still held liable under the law, right? There are still codes of conduct that exist for doctors, etc., to make sure they don't act out of line. Now moving on to my first argument on why the state is going to be the best actor in this situation. First, on why kids are the most important actor in this debate. I think first, just the fact that this child is born in this country means that the state has the obligation to help this person, right? I think this exists through things like education or mandatory vaccines, etc., where the state has to protect this child until they grow old to this expectation that someday these children will be meaningful to society, right? Know that this is important because children have very, very little autonomy. We think under this case, where their situation is extremely urgent, the state must act to protect these children, right? Second layer then, on why parents are likely to not be as great actors in this situation. I think three reasons. First, we tell you that, wait, shall I take a point?
If the state has an obligation to care for children, does this mean they should seize all children at birth and raise them under the state rather than letting parents do it?
No, I think there's certain situations where the state should do that, and certain situations where the state should not do that, which I'll talk about more later on. But just second, why are parents worse actors than the state? We tell you first, parents are likely to be less informed than doctors, right? We tell you in any medical situation, if a parent does not have adequate medical training, there's always going to be an asymmetry of information between the doctor and the parent themselves, right? We tell you under then, parents are unable to make the best decision for their kids. But second, I think parents just have an emotional connection to their kids, right? That's to say, if there's this very dangerous medical procedure that won't help the kids, but is looks very gruesome in the process, I think parents are more likely to say, no, I do not want my child to go through this procedure because they can't stand the sight of their child suffering, right? I think under that, parents are likely to make decisions that are not the best for their kids simply because they do not want to see their kids suffer in the short term. But third, I think parents have a variety of other responsibilities, right? This looks like they have other children, or they have to care about their job, financial situation, etc., right? I think under that, the advancement of their own personal lives or their own job opportunities is likely going to come at the expense of their children to some extent. To that end, then, we tell you parents are unlikely to be able to care for their children to the greatest extent. So why is the state a better actor then? I think simply because they have more information, right? But they're also far more impartial. I think the state only has a singular objective of protecting these kids. I don't think they have. I think under that, the state is more likely to take bigger actions that actually help kids under our side, right? This probably looks like states investing a lot of money into development because they want to help these kids they want to help these kids have better lives and fix their medical situation, right? I think this is likely to exist to such a large extent in a world where parents make the majority of medical decisions. The impact then is that no matter what options on our side, there's going to be children who are safe only on our side that are likely to die on off, right? I think this is quite obvious, but yes, I'll take your point.
Yes, state allocating money to help vulnerable children is symmetric on both sides, since state always want to protect the most vulnerable one and it's look very good on political party. If they have the enough capability, they help it anyway, just like how current state helping HIV kids.
I think, I'm going to talk about this next, but I think under your side, there's going to be a moral hazard, right? Where the state can say, oh, because the parents are responsible for their children, I don't necessarily have to invest that much into like healthcare development. The state is the only actor that is responsible for the well-being of our side. I think only then are they able to put more resources because they are held more accountable by the people, right? I don't think this is symmetric at all. So next, on a principle on why parents just don't necessarily get custody of children in all cases. This engages with the first POI from opposition team. So it's important to note in some cases parents can lose their children when the state takes them away, right? This looks like when children are taken to juvenile because they've committed a crime, or when kids are taken away from their parents because their parents are abusive, right? We tell you that there's this underlying principle that at a certain point where either parents fail to raise their kids really or fail to give them the best protections, the state is allowed to take them away because the state has their interest in mind, right? We tell you that under their side, parents are to some extent responsible for the medical emergency the child is in the first place, right? It probably looks like if you let your kid eat instant noodles every day and suddenly they get cancer, you're probably responsible for that, right? We tell you under that, the state has, you as a parent have failed your child, and the state has the ability to take your children away. For these reasons, very proud to propose.
Thanks very much, PM. Let's begin opposition case by calling on Leader Bob, whenever you're ready.
Life is not just about the extension of our life, but rather live with dignity, but rather live with the choices that we are going to make about what is the best life that we are wishing to live for. The context of this debate do not actually necessarily happen in a context that, you know what, the kids are going to die, and the parents choose to do nothing. Noting that most of the time, parents will talk with the doctor, and that most of the time, parents do trust and rely on the doctor for medical consultation. For a long time. They tell that the first idea here is that parents are very emotional and have way less informed. We tell that this is not the case. For instance, doctor can always express the necessary message in a simple way towards the parent. For instance, you can do a more risky surgery, but you have a higher chance of having the kids to live, or you have less risky surgery, but probably it's going to have long-term effect on the children. All these things can be quantifiable in terms of percentage as well as foreseeable outcome of what will happen. This is something that a rational individual are capable of judging. But secondly, more importantly, we believe that emotion and understanding toward the children's life is the most important judgment criteria for us to debate. Why? Today's debate is not really about if you should continue the life of the children or not. If you are only have that choice, most most parents will follow that. This may happen in a niche discussion where that normally you have to make certain trade-off in terms of the kind of medical procedure. For instance, for a kid who want to become a football player, who have, let's say they infected leg, you want to chop off the leg to secure more security in the long term, or do you want to like help them more conservative treatment or more radical treatment in the future that may possibly help this guy to become a football player? In the stage 3 cancer case, do you want to extend their life as much as possible to went through chemo, which is extremely suffering and painful, or do you want to actually lead them, help them to live the most happiest life for the rest of their life? The idea of dignity and choice, we believe, is the only thing that matters in this debate context. So what I'm going to run to do today, the fourth thing to run through is explaining that why this is principally justified and as a counter comparison towards Saigal's argument. Second, I'm going to explain to you how this significantly increased the burden for the doctor. Lastly, I'll tell you that how it was made the case significant was of in extremely conservative context. The fourth thing here is about justification. We believe individual have broad autonomy. It doesn't just mean that I'm going to decide what I like to do, but it's also relatively matters what you do upon your life, what you make choices of your life. The reason of that comes as follows. The first idea, if you think about it, is the parents and children are normally who are the one who affected the most about the medical procedure itself, right? For instance, children may being affected by the long-term influence of the medical. Children may be directly affected based on different approach of therapies or treatment that this doctor decided to take. This also related to the parent. A lot of time, children are actually the extension of parents' life, but moreover, a lot of time parents need to take the financial burden of long-term context in here to helping the particular situation. Why choices and trade-off about which kind of life that you want to live in, about long-term or short-term, about urgency and protection is something that really important and human view is the most important thing in itself that as we discussed today. The fourth thing I would like to discuss for you here is that a lot of the doctor decision that they need, if that is to not fit the patient's or the parent's willingness, is actually meaningless. Imagine you are in a stage 3 cancer, but you actually want to spend the best amount of time in the rest of your life compared to suffering from the chemo. Even if the doctor somehow sufficiently extend your life for half a year or 2 years in these cases, right? It's increasing suffering and painful for you as an individual beginning. For example, you want to be a super football player and then you like to take more radical approach, but the doctor simply took your head black off. It means that your gym also becoming loose, right? This means that a lot of time we should prioritize individual choices, but they are the one directly affected by decision. They are the most important one. I think the idea they talk about is to say that you know what, government have the idea of like helping individual as well as like if parents fail to take care of the children, government have the right to take away the agency. Yes, but now of this situation or context that we talking about if parents are capable of taking care of children, but we are rather instead talking about what's the best decision for people to make in this perspective. I think a very simple intuition pump that you can analyze or relate to is that state should be an authority, like should be an agency that respect human will and what people prioritize in their life. A lot of time, particularly, if you think about it, right, we allow people to drink alcohol, even that is obviously viewing like harm their body of smoking or gambling a lot of context. The reason why this should be allowed is not individual could need that consumption of this product or the life choices that I made, for instance, going some extremely small activity is something that crucially matter for my life and extremely important from this process that the state should afford and allow it. Why? Because life itself does not really have value. But like human life only have value when human will stand, when the point that we want stand. That's to say anything about extending life or saving numbers doesn't really matter in this perspective if this is a life that you don't wish to live in. Yes, any door I from government.
How do you ensure children's wishes are followed given parents are still the ones who make decisions?
Yeah, we just think that will not follow more, and most of the time, like children and parents have much more stronger emotional high connection. But also, secondly, how this like further the responsibility of why this is necessary that way. Note that in this process, parents are normally being fully excluded from the process of making decision. That means a few things. That means that and second, parents are normally become very emotionally unstable as they claim. This means a few things. The fourth thing here is that if the experience fail, a lot of like bad results happen. It's much more likely they will be pissed at the doctor because they are not the one who getting involved. Think about how you are going to see your children die without any decision-making process of you in this particular context. It means that there will be more direct suitcase against the doctor. It means that more responsibility are going to be held. Why this is something that's significantly bad? We believe it's significantly bad for a few things. The fourth thing here is that you're likely to see that the best case scenario is that doctor very conservative way of treatment because they don't willing to take any risk or respect your willingness in this. Because the most important thing for them to do is to make sure that they don't get any responsibility. But also a second more important thing for us to consider here is that you're likely to see that people don't want to report the simply because the responsibility is too big. Making moral decision is a huge mental burden, not to explain the lawsuit after. This is something crucial matter, especially when we already live in the world where medical resources is extremely limited. Lastly, how about those conservative children, conservative parents, and who are those that, for instance, playing in religion, for instance, who are within the context of that is that they are unlikely to send their children to hospital or they can't find under doctor at the beginning. The reason why this is the case, for instance, I have huge financial burden. Then if I know that I cannot make any decision towards my children to take care of in this case, I probably won't send them to the hospital. Or if I'm a religious parent, I know that I cannot stop the treatment at any point. I probably won't send them to hospital at the beginning because I know that I have no autonomy on controlling this. However, why completely speaking, we're better. We believe that A, we have at least certain level of like doctor intervention. As long as they send to the hospital, we can easily have government intervention and doctor intervention. This also means that we have a more smoother communication with the parents that may possibly change their opinion. Ladies and gentlemen, life is not just about extension, existence, but rather about will and choice. Based on all this, vote for all.
Thank you very much, the leader of for this speech. Let's continue the case by calling on BPM. Everywhere.
In necessary situations, we tell you that the state needs to intervene in certain situations to ensure that the children and the well-being is good. Four things I'm going to do in this speech. The first on clarifications, the second on our parents or state better actors, the third on our parents principally deserve of this control, and the fourth on a few pieces of weighing. But before that, what is the path to victory on our side of the house? The path to victory is very simple. That's to say, the well-being of the children ought to be prioritized, and the medical professionals are the best actor in the debate, even if it means giving up parental custody of the child on our side. But then I'd like to clarify where the debate takes place then. The debate likely takes place in where the parent is likely going to make a different decision than the medical professional they're consulting. Why is this true? Because if they're making the same decision, the impact is likely going to be the same on either side of the house anyways. The delta of the debate is where they make a different decision than the medical professional. But second, I'd like to note here that the parents are the ones that dictating state's actions under their side of the house. That is simply not an exclusive point that they can claim. That doesn't mean that everything they try to say, which is that parents can listen to doctors, does not apply to the part of the debate. Because if they talk about parents can listen to doctors, but on either side they're going to make the same decision anyway. That's not part of the debate. What's part of the debate is when they make different decisions, and we tell you this is the delta of the debate. First question then, are parents good actors or are state better actors? We like to note here that what constitutes a better actor is if you have the incentive and if you have the capacity to do so. Note here, what Op tries to claim here is that parents are good actors because they claim they could, listen to doctors, for example. But we tell you, sure, let's take Elo's example. Let's say the doctor presents a moral dilemma to the parent, say that if you take the surgery, larger risk of something else, and then if you don't take the surgery, there might be, another risk. Why are parents good actors to respond to this particular dilemma? It's untrue and it's unclear as to why that's the case. We told you they never had medical professional training. They're probably not the best actors to analyze the situation anyways, because they have never seen this medical professional situation in their lives in the first place. That's exactly the problem they have never dealt with and have no engagement under their side. The second thing I'll take you later is they try to claim, dignity and choice is very important. But note here, I find it very, very funny because under their side, parents are the ones dictating the choice for the children. Let's say the children wants to live a life where he doesn't take chemotherapy, but the parent is like, no, you should take chemotherapy. And the children can do under their side of the house. The children have no choice on either side of the house. It's unclear what the dignity and choice can be achieved under their side. But second, no, choice is likely going to be contingent on you having or at least being a decent actor in the debate. Let's take alcohol, for example. They say, people have the right to take alcohol or people have the right to do things like gambling as long as it's legal. But note here, if this is illegal gambling or if you do alcohol and you start to harm other people, you're a very bad actor, and the state now comes in and sends the police and says you're no longer able to drink or you're probably going to serve some jail time. No, here, or at least what we can see the underlying principle here is that this choice does not matter if you're not a good actor or if you're not a good enough actor in the situation. That's to say, the choice to decide what is best for your body is unlikely one to be given because you are not a good actor in the debate. This choice unlikely exists. Let's talk about whether states are good actors then, because the main claim that Bob claimed is that there are going to be medical professionals are likely going to make conservative choices. First, I'd like to contend with this, that one, this is factually untrue. You probably have some level or some wiggle room of legal protection that the government would give. Say, for example, when you do this XYZ thing, you will not be legally liable for this. That probably is already in place in the status quo already. Let's say, for example, there's CPR legal protection, right? If somebody is having a stroke, for example, and I do a CPR for him, the state already has law in place in Taiwan, for example, that says if that person dies, you are not legally liable for it. But second, no, this legally liability also exists under their side of the house. Let's say, for example, the parents consent to a surgery, but then the children dies in the surgery. The parent would also have the capability to sue the doctor on the other side of the house because they might say, the doctor did something wrong in the surgery. That means the conservative choice would be made on either side if the doctor preserves or the doctor presumes that there's going to be some sort of risk in this particular chance. The idea that doctors make conservative choices is unlikely to be true. But even if doctors make conservative choices, why are these choices better? Because think about the situation where the doctor is like, no, I think we need to make a conservative choice. That inherently means the risk is too high, and the medical professional is the best actor to evaluate that this risk is too high, and the medical professional is making the best decision here, even if it's conservative. It's unimpressive why this conservative choice is very bad. What do we tell you at the end of this question? We tell you that it's better for the child when you have a medical professional that's professionally trained to do this for the children, and the children, since both sides agree the children is the most important actor in the debate, we tell you we achieve this on our side of the house. Before I go to the second question,
medical professionals, no parents are perfect decision makers. However, comparatively speaking, it's easier to teach the parents the medical advice than it is to teach the medical professionals the priorities of the child. And that is why the parents should be one empowered to make a choice.
That's very factually untrue. Medical professionals, you teach medical professional, when you teach parents a dilemma, they have to make a choice on I'll use L's example. Let's say I'm a low income family. About 70% chance the child survives. But if I do the surgery, there's a 100% chance the child survives. If I'm a low income family, I'm a parent, and I go like, you know what, maybe I can just gamble and that person would live in the 70% chance world. That's a very bad decision for the children because the children has to bear the 30% risk on your side of the house. If the state intervenes, we tell you the children is the most important actor, the children will be protected on our side. The second question is, sure, let's assume the claim they want to say, parents deserve control. But we tell you that they do not deserve control of the situation. Two reasons. One, that when you deserve control of the situation, it probably means you are contingent on getting a better practical result. Better practical result is achieved on our side. What's the second reason then? We note here that when the situation is dire enough, you allow the state to interfere, and when this form of interference happens, we tend to think this is justified. Some examples here. Let's say, for example, there's a parental abuse. We tend to justify government interfering in this family because the children is being abused here. Or second, let's say the children does something very bad, like drinking alcohol and hit other people, and then that's legally liable. We allow the state to come in and actually take custody and jail them, even though parents have custody of that. What is the underlying principle here? The underlying principle is that in certain situations, as long as it's urgent, we allow parents to not have authority over it. We allow states to actually control the situation. This applies to this situation because the motion literally describes the situation as the most urgent, the most dire, and the most serious situation here. And we tell you if the state is the better actor, then they are the better actor. They deserve to take control of the situation, not the parents. For this reason, very proud to propose. Thank you.
All right. Thanks very much, Vivian. Let's hear now from the other. Vivian.
Medical decisions are indeed life or death decisions, but life and death in this debate is not synonymous with right or wrong. The right thing could well be to choose death to prevent prolonged suffering, or it could be to choose life in spite of the overwhelming risk of death. This is why oftentimes in medical decision, be it children or adults, we don't have standard operating procedures. Rather, we have options, choices, explanations, even the right to refuse treatment. That is because this field is inherently subjective. There's a large gray area, and we think on that parents are the ones in the best place to be able to actively evaluate the factors that exist to decide in the best interest of the children. The first thing I'm going to do in this speech is to reveal why exactly parents are good actors to the decision. Because the proposition claims in this debate seem to be three distinct mechanisms. A, that parents are less informed. B, parents don't want to see the suffering of the child. And C, that parents don't care because they're going to have to spend the money and this is something that they won't want to do. Direct responses. Why is less information not exactly an important consideration in this debate? Well, I agree that parents are not trained. I agree they have not seen this before, but they have seen before that child. They've seen that child for the last 10 years. They've raised them. They've spent every day with them. They know that child. They know the future they want. They know their disposition. They know what exactly is best for them and how the child will necessarily cope with this treatment. This is why the example that the minister gives you, the leader of opposition gives you, when he explains what it's like to choose chemotherapy or to allow the child to enjoy its last days of life, is not necessarily something a doctor is ever going to be able to structurally evaluate. These are likely to be emergency situations. Note, serious does not mean emergency. Serious means there's a grave decision to be made, but it does not mean the decision has been made right now. This is because in emergency situations, i.e. you've got a car or you're in a sudden accident, there's no room for anybody to make a decision. They send you straight to the ER, you'll find out after, and then you decide subsequently what types of treatments you want to follow. Even if you've been diagnosed with something like stage 3 or stage 4 cancer, you can chemotherapy right away, right? There's oftentimes is a span of time in which you're able to make a decision. Like people give you time to consider these types of things. And the reason why there is sustained information in these instances is because of the fact that medical professionals are under a legal duty to be able to explain these things to you. And that means disclosing every single risk and explaining to you and getting your consent. They explain incredibly difficult things in incredibly difficult situations all the time. We often have training things like empathy and empathy, which means they're very likely to be able to convince and persuade you why you should be able to do these things, which means that snap decisions or irrational decisions are unlikely to be decisions that ever occur, especially when faced with the gravity of this. Now I know the response they might have is to say, but it's your child, you really, really care about. It's really, really serious situations. Yes, every serious situation in life is one that you care about, is one that is grave, and is one that carries risk. But that does not negate people's ability to ever be able to properly consent, properly make informed decisions. They need to give additional mechanisms in third to be able to rebut this point. The next thing they then say is that, oh, but parents will err on the side of caution because it's money that's being spent. But they never really explain what the counterfactual is. They never explain why the state on their side of the house is going to pay for this in every single decision, in every single instance. Or why the state has a structural capacity to be able to do so, insofar as they want to push that burden. On our side, we explain that it is plausible that the state will do these things. There is push on that because things like saving children is a top priority in any given state. But the comparative is that parents are the ones who are more likely to bear the cost, absent them proving this very big and very speculative benefit. And the reason, and we're not saying that costs are a reason why parents should be allowed to not give you treatment. We are saying cost is a reason why parents should be the ones to decide to give you that treatment or to decide what type of treatment they're going to be able to give you. And the reason is very structurally because it affects the best interest of the child. Subsequently, you pay for that operation, and then what? You pay for the next one. Can you pay for the next one? Can you pay for the lifetime of medication? Can you pay for someone to stay home and take care of the child? Can you pay for the siblings that one of you quits your job and has to stay home and take care of the child? There's a lot of complex financial decisions, so it's very easy to say it's right or wrong. We must save a life, but what cost does that life come at? It comes at the cost of the rest of your life, the family's life, the siblings' life. In the worst case scenarios where parents are forced to be pushed into debt to be able to support this child. And the question then is therefore the question that leader of opposition raised, which no one has answered yet, which is what type of life we necessarily want these families to live. That being said, I think we fundamentally rebuilt why exactly parents are good decision makers. I will now engage in direct responses. The first thing I want to be able to explain and extend on is what LO claims on religious families. Because plausibly, the best prop case in this debate is to say that certain very religious or very conservative families will do things like deny you like life-sustaining treatment. So for instance, they might do things like deny you blood transfusion, so on and so forth, or other parents who don't necessarily want control to be taken out by the state. The reason why that would fundamentally get worse on proposition side of the house is because these parents, now that they know in any single instance where the decision is serious, they have no say whatsoever, nothing. And that is bad because their comparative is not that is better decisions, but ones where people are likely to opt out of the system altogether. We're not saying this is most people, we're saying the most conservative types of people are the ones who are going to do so. They don't actually achieve their comparative of allowing those children to ever receive their direct medical treatment. And we think that's something that's fundamentally bad. But even if they want to explain that this is not within the parents' right to do so, I question what is exactly within the parents' religious, moral, or normative rights. So for instance, some of us in this room might think it's child abuse if your child fasts for a whole month, but certain religions allow that. Some of us in this room thinks that mutilation might be illegal, but some religions allow circumcision. What is fundamentally bad is dependent on the parents' calculus, and we don't think this meets the threshold of abuse, yes.
Your parents would make the decision for you on their side of the house. You then concede that children don't have any choice on your side.
In this debate, children have no choices. I think we might debate about whether or not parents are good actors or doctors are good actors. I think we all agree that children are bad actors. The question then, therefore, is who is the closest approximation to the best interest of children? And this is where they say that medical professionals make good decisions, they make calculated decisions. But I want to know that sometimes risk-averse decisions may also not be the best decisions, right? Because there's no structural truth to it. So, for instance, the likely counterfactual on the outside of the house, because they say that there's things like legal formalities in place, means we now more have things like standard operating procedures. It means you cut out things that could be risky but potentially very helpful. I.e., a life-saving surgery that might well allow you to walk again is not something that's no longer an option because of the fact that it might kill you or make you permanently disabled in the process. The legality on the outside of the house and the fact that it now shift the entirety of a risk-sharing operation upon doctors themselves means that hospitals and everyone will err on the side of caution because they don't want to make the decision. They don't want to be the person that end up killing that child. The comparative is insofar as we allow the sharing of risk, we don't have those perverse incentives necessarily in play. Again, I think what you ought to take away from this debate is that there is no right and there is no wrong decisions. But who knows the child best? The doctor for whom this is just another statistic in a life or death rate, or the parent for whom this is the center of their world?
Thank you very much, Diallo. Let's conclude the constructive part of the debate for 12 by calling on 12, please.
Everyone ready? I think it's very interesting how DLO just told us children's rights don't actually matter when the entirety of their LO was based on the assumption that on their side, children have more autonomy. A few things I'm going to go through today. First, I want to talk about a principle clash and then a practical clash. So I'm not going to spend that much time on this principle clash because DLO just told us it's not important. But basically, in this debate, opposition has told us a few things, right? They told us autonomy for kids is the best thing, because like they have their aspirations, etc., and that parents are somehow able to fulfill these children's aspirations by making medical decisions for them. Well, that is not true. I think first, it's still very unclear why parents are going to have more interest in what their kids care about, right? Like, sure, you can say parents know their kids more than a random doctor does, but it does not necessarily mean that the parents always have the best interest of these kids in mind. If you wanted to become a football player, but your mom was like, no, football is a stupid profession, you should become a you should become like an engineer or something. I think under your side, you're still unable to continue your dream, right? I think they have to tell us why, beyond that, parents know their kids for longer, why parents are going to always have the best interest of their kids in mind, right? But I think under their side, autonomy is actually taken from these kids, right? I think to a greater extent, right? I think under their side, I think they never engaged with our point on like moral hazard and stuff, right? We told you that under their side, where parents are equally responsible for a child's well-being as well as the government, I think the government then is able to take less responsibility for a child's well-being, right? That's to say, the government is probably not going to implement as many checks or have as much electoral incentive to fund the healthcare system because parents are probably going to be responsible for paying it out of their pocket, right? I think it's very reasonable to assume that in a world where the state is going to be responsible for a child's medical emergencies to a large extent, there's going to be electoral incentive where the government actively tries to improve healthcare by having like mandatory health checks or better insurance plans so that parents can actually support their children, right? I think this is a very reasonable delta to assume on our side. But I think it's also very important to note that OPT doesn't even fulfill their own principal features, which is that under their side, kids will have their best interest in mind, right? I think they didn't really engage with our characterization on how parents have inherently different incentives from their children, right? That's to say, even if a child wants something, a parent does not want it because, as they said, there's a lot of complex financial reasons as to why parents might not choose this best for their kid, right? I think the reason why our principle then is most important is because life is very important, right? I think children's autonomy is not that important because they are not that important, right? When I was 3 years old, I wanted to be a princess, but I'm not a princess because I grew up and learned I can make better choices, right? I think under that, it's the state's responsibility to ensure that this kid can actually grow and develop so they can make better decisions in the future, right? That's to say, even if this child has to suffer through chemotherapy so they can live an extra few years, we tell you this is a good choice because it means a child can exercise their autonomy better in the future, right? I think this does not exist on opposition side because children are simply less informed and less able to exercise their autonomy because they don't have that much information, right? Before I move on to your point.
On that response, we already told you two things. The first here is that there's much more likelihood that parents will actually care about and research when it's small. But also secondly, we do consider parents are very important stakeholder, especially this means that a lot of finance can make a financial decision or their lifelong decision probably about.
So yeah, as I talked about earlier, I don't think parents have the right to decide what children want to do with their life, right? A child is not condemned to a life of like living as a very religious person and not being able to get blood transfusions simply because they lost the birth lottery, right? I think on our side, we're able to protect kids from like the adverse effects of the birth lottery by preserving their lives so that they can make better, more decisions in the future, right? This does not exist on opposition side. So next, I want to talk about the practical clash we have in this debate. I think at the end of this debate, they still don't really engage with the fact that, like, on our side, there's going to be kids that will die on opposition side, right? We already told you this is because of structural reasons, such as doctors are more informed about their patients, or that, like, we think on our side, the government is able to provide more support for patients in a world where, like, the state has so much responsibility over children. So what have they told us under practical? I think first, they talked about how like there's going to be a lot of conservative people who no longer send their kids to doctors because they're afraid that doctors will do horrible, horrible things to their children, right? I think first, this delta is probably marginal, right? Under your side, I don't think religious people still aren't going to send their kids to a doctor because they don't believe in modern medicine or they don't believe in blood transfusions and stuff, right? I'm unclear as to why on their side conservative parents are going to send their kids to like the doctors significantly more. But I think under our side, where like the state has so much responsibility for kids, I think there's probably going to be more mandatory checkups where kids are actually forced to go to the doctor compared to their side where the government has minimal involvement over children's well-being, right? But I also want to address the point of how they talked about there's going to be less doctors under our side. I think this is just quite a strange point to make, right? If you're already in medical school and you think biology is your passion and you want to be a doctor, you're going to be a doctor anyways, right? I think most people, regardless of whether they have to make large decisions for their patients, are already going to be prepared for this, right? I think a doctor is supposed to understand that they have more information than the patients, which is they still even under their side, doctors still have to make decisions to a large extent, right? They still have to suggest which treatment is better for their patients, even if there's going to be a lot of risks involving in this procedure. Right? I think under our side then, there's not going to be significantly less doctors because doctors are still aware of the risks they take no matter what. Very proud to propose.
All right, thank you very much, Phil Whip, for the speech. Let's conclude the constructives for opposition by calling off right now. Here.
Three things I want to talk about this debate. Firstly, who is the better decision maker for the healthcare system on aggregate? And lastly, this principle better custodian for a child's agency. Firstly, who's the best decision maker? The first thing I want to talk about is who has the best information to make regarding the medical choices that exist. I think my deputy has already explained sufficiently why the gap doesn't exist sufficiently to the point where it matters. But here's the even if here. The even if here is that in opposition's world, there's an incentive to educate parents and teach parents about the medical situation that their child is in and the possibilities and consequences of different medical decisions, right? Because the doctor has to persuade the parent about what is the best medical choice and therefore has to provide the information and provide the education to the parent. In the comparative, in Gov's world, if Gov's problem is that parents are not sufficiently educated and aware of the medical decisions and procedures that child actually are subjected to, that's going to get far worse in government world. Because in government world, there is no incentive for the doctor to spend valuable time and valuable energy trying to convince the parent of what is right and wrong, trying to convince the parent of the medical decisions that exist, because they know that the parent's choice doesn't matter anyway. So it suggests to you that if the problem in today's debate is an information asymmetry that exists, on off, we create an incentive for the information asymmetry to be built. On off, they remove that incentive entirely. The second thing I want to talk about then is emotion. So again, I think we've already proven to you sufficiently why emotion is not a sufficiently winning metric for Gov in this world, because I think many of these decisions, these medical decisions are not decisions made in the emergency room, or decisions made that you can go back home and sit on for a few weeks before you actually make a decision, right? So I'm not really sure why emotion is going to be a big deal. But even if emotions do have a sway on the decision that is made by a parent, I don't think God can actually explain to me why emotions are bad. I would posit to you here the fairly reasonable intuition push that emotions aren't bad. Emotions represent your priorities. Emotions represent what you feel the most strongly about and what is most important for you in your life. So if you feel emotion about and you feel particularly pain when you conceptualize your child having to live on life support, having to be in a coma for the next 2, 3, 4 years of life, you possibly feel that little pain because you know and believe that deep down your heart that's not something your child will want. That's not something your child will be happy with, even though your child is currently comatose and can't tell you what the differences are. So I'll posit to you that actually emotions are oftentimes a reasonable proxy of what is actually important for that child. But the third thing here is about, the last thing I'll talk about with regards to the decision-making capacities of medical professionals is who is on the best proxy of interest for the child. Because I think both of us probably agree that we don't want 13-year-olds deciding whether or not they want to go through chemotherapy, right? But this debate is probably about who is best able to approximate the child's interest while also accommodating for other factors that the child is probably not going to be able to account for themselves, or the child or the decision maker themselves go.
Would you then condemn parents on your side and make a different choice than what the child wants for themselves?
We think, as I'm going to prove right now, I think oftentimes parents what I'm going to prove here is that parents do not always agree exactly with what the child wants. However, we think that oftentimes A, parents have the best interest of the child, and B, parents always consider the preferences of the child, even if they do not ultimately defer to preferences. And in cases where they do not defer to the preferences of the child, it's probably a very good reason for doing so, right? So here, I think Gov alleges that there are many cases in which parents don't respect kids' preferences, right? But I have several responses here. The first response here is that it's unclear why medical professionals will do any better. Like sure, like your parent probably doesn't want to support your princess or whatever nonsense, right? Sorry, right? But it's unclear to me like why a medical professional is going to care much more about your pipe dreams about basketball. So even if it's true that nobody cares about kids' dreams, unfortunately it's true that neither a doctor nor a parent cares about the kids' dreams, right? That's probably not that simple. The second response here, however, is the more important response, is that parents don't always agree with what the child wants, but probably take into consideration seriously and give it due consideration of whether or not the best child. So even though your parent may not agree with, for example, your dreams to pursue basketball, your parent probably does consider the fact that you do special sports, but the decision therefore on whether or not to allow you to pursue that sport is probably based on the feasibility of it, on whether or not your parent believes that it's sustainable for you to pursue, right? So oftentimes, even when parents don't agree exactly what the child wants, parents at least respect the preferences of the child and account for the child's preferences when making a decision. And oftentimes when they differ from the child's preferences, that's often for a fairly good reason. But here's the trade-off here. The trade-off here is that problems like information, problems like emotionality are things that can be mitigated. They can be mitigated with better awareness, better education, better communication. They can be mitigated with waiting times. However, the parent's unique connection to the child, the parent's unique ability to live with the child, to understand what the child wants, to actually live and live in a household that must support the child who comes out from the operating room. That is something that we can never impart upon medical professionals, and therefore the metric of exclusivity, I think that are probably the better decision makers here. But the second question is therefore, what is best for the healthcare system? I want to talk about two things here. Firstly, on incentive. Gov tells me that incentive to improve healthcare system is going to be higher on their side. I want to note two reasons why it's probably symmetric. The first is that kids' health is quite unanimously important as a political issue. Everybody probably doesn't want kids to get cancer. Everybody feels really sad when small boys get leukemia, right? Kids being healthy and kids supported by hospitals is a very easy political issue that almost every politician is going to support. That's probably symmetric on both sides. But second thing here is that even in all, parents in all are likely to lobby very hard for better healthcare for the children because they want the system to be better for the children. They want the support to be better for the children. And this lobbying is likely to be successful because, as I already explained earlier on, this fairly easy political issue for most politicians to grab onto. This suggests to you, as I already told you, that any gaps in healthcare for children don't arise from incentive, but rather arise from capacity and are unlikely to be changed in Gov world. The last thing I'll talk to you about, therefore, is on parents and custody. Gov talks about many scenarios in which parents have their custody revoked. But we tell you here that most of these are quite symmetric, right? So in the cases of abusive and negligent parents, they're probably going to be relieved of their custody either way because of the mechanisms that obviously exist on either side of the house. The thing I want to note here is that the threshold for revoking parental custody is especially high. We don't revoke custody of the parent when the state is marginally better than the parent. We only revoke custody when the state is clearly ahead of the parent because the parent is grossly negligent or grossly abusive. This is just that parents probably have a principal custody over the child. But the most important thing I want to tell you about at the end of the debate is that we think that wins the principal clash for two reasons. The first is that we prove to you that right and wrong is not equivalent to life and death. Therefore, the right decision is about accounting best for the kid's interests, the kid's preferences, and who is best able to support the kid post-operation. We told that parents have both the best representation of the kid's interests and the best ability to assess the decision that is most sustainable in the long
Alright. Thank you very much, Opposition Whip, for the speech. Let's conclude opposition overall by calling on top reply here.
Just to check, it's 4 minutes, right? Okay. Sorry, judging.
This is 3.
It's 4.
4.
Okay. Proposition couldn't win this debate by saying that sometimes some parents may not make good decisions or consistent decisions. What Prop needed to defend in this debate was why an absolute derogation of rights in any and all serious instances was one that is justifiable. We told you that absent the threshold of gross or negligent harm, a derogation of parental rights, especially in serious and important decisions, that is grossly unjustified. I'm going to structure this reply as follows. First, what is more or less symmetric in this debate? 1. Capacity for information. Precisely because of the reasons that they provide first on behalf of the House, i.e. legal accountability, duty to inform, duty to engage, and for the reasons I also provide, that these aren't snap decisions, emergency decisions, but rather decisions that you've had time to sit on, think on before you sign a consent form. The capacity and ability of parents to intellectually understand and intellectually make reasonably rational and not just in-the-moment decisions about their children is probably something that is likely symmetric. This is because parents oftentimes have to make very serious decisions for their children all the time. The fact that they are children, as mentioned, does not relieve them of the capacity to be able to seriously and meaningfully consider the decisions that ought to be made. Therefore, their positive material on why exactly parents are bad actors, which was pertained largely to the situation, is one that just structurally did not make sense. The next thing that was more or less symmetric in this debate was about the state's incentive to care or to be willing to take extra additional steps to be able to provide better care or facilitate care more overall. As I explained down the bench on our side, we said that this was symmetric because children are, unlike other things, i.e. rehabilitating ex-convicts or sometimes even the environment, are things that are relatively uncontentious because who doesn't like children? What this means is that the benefits on the other side of the house were not ones that were fundamentally exclusive or not ones that they fundamentally would uniquely be able to benefit from. Then is this debate about? This debate, as mentioned, is about who best is able to consider the interests of the child. Now, they try to frame this as, but this is about the rights of the child per se. As mentioned, we don't think the child per se deserves these rights as long as they're below the age of 18. The question is who's in the best position to weigh up, to consider all of those various factors, to make a decision that closest approximates the child. And this is where we win on their metric, because they want conservative decisions. They want risk-averse decisions. But sometimes these conservative and risk-averse decisions are not necessarily good. In the instances where they come at a significant cost, the cost the family has to bear because they don't prove why the state's going to pay it. Or if these conservative decisions come at the cost of a life, i.e. you avoid risky surgery that could potentially save your life because you want the kid to die in surgery, right? As I mentioned, the life or death rates, a bad decision. So risk aversity, regardless of outcome, be it life or death, is not one that is good. Therefore, the way I told you this debate ought to be adjudicated should stand, i.e. that this is not about conservative or non-conservative, but this is about a gray area and who best can weigh up every single possible interest. Therefore, the material that does fundamentally stand is that the parents are entitled to make this decision for two distinct reasons. The first reason is that parents subsequently bear the financial cost of these decisions. And even if we are talking about the best interest of the child, that directly relates to the best interest of the child, the best interest in the ability to sustain the child into the long run, to give them proper care, adequate care, to stay at home, to take care of them, to take care of their siblings, to care of their family overall. That was something that fell to the parents, and that is something the parents ought to consider. The other reason why we told you it ought to be up to the parents to make decisions is fundamentally because parents know their children best. Medical professional medicine best, I completely agree, no contentions with that. But there's a lot more complexity to make it. That's why we don't have standard operating procedures. though some procedures will save your life and some don't. For those two distinct reasons, we think parents are a better proxy for the children, and also for the reasons that we explained. At the end of the day, what you ought to fundamentally consider is that parents bear the burden, even if the state reaps the benefit.
Thanks very much, opposition reply. Let's conclude the Gov case and the debate overall by calling now the government reply case.
I'm going to summarize the op case using an example. Let's say I'm the parent and our family has a tradition of a religion, and my child is suffering from, let's say, a very severe health situation. And I tell my children, no, you can't do this life-saving surgery because of religion. This is extremely very, very bad because this directly proves why parents are very bad decision makers under their side of the house. So you have religion that is another considering factor that interferes with the children's ability to live. But note here, the children does not have the choice to decide, oh, I actually want to live with surgery, because the parents of the nurse are making the decision under their side of the house. What is likely to happen on our side in this situation? Medical professionals are likely going to objectively evaluate the situation and say, should we do surgery 1 or surgery 2? And they say, I think we should do surgery 2, and then we should actually solve this issue for this children so that this children can survive. We win this debate for 2 reasons. One, parents do not deserve the autonomy or the control over their children. And second, even if they do, they're making extreme bad choices for their children. Let's talk about the first thing. They say, parents might likely make choices that adhere or align with the children's wants. But let's talk about why those children's wants are unlikely going to be true, or unlikely going to be accurate, or unlikely going to be what the children truly want, right? Let's say the doctor comes in and says, a lot of medical terminologies like, your pancreas might be suffering from a lot of this. I don't expect the 12-year-old can actually understand that. I won't expect the 12-year-old actually think or actually feel what it feels like to have your pancreas, harmed to what extent. For example, right? The children cannot make that decision because the children, a 12-year-old, is probably not able to feel or actually be a good actor in a good position to know what this case is for them for the future. That's why children are not good actors. So even parents do listen to them, parents are probably going to make very bad decisions. The second, parents are also or constantly making very different decisions than their children themselves. You oftentimes see disagreements between parents because often parents are, say, 40 years old, they've seen different things, they've been through different experiences, they might have different perspectives that do not align with the children. The choice of the children is never going to be granted under their side. Even if it is a very extremely bad choice that the children probably would likely regret in the future. Let's say the children does not do chemotherapy and dies in the next 6 months. The children might actually regret that decision at the near end of the death. They're not good actors to decide what is best for them in the first place. That's why the choice and dignity does not work on their side. And note that Prop Whip and DPM already why this is the case. There's no engagement on their side of the house. But let's assume they actually have this. But let's assume they actually have this choice on their side. What is likely going to happen? We tell you that medical professionals can come in and say, make an objective evaluation. They understand the medical terminologies that children do not understand. And they say, I think we should do this. According to the doctor's ability, it probably is better in accordance to this particular surgery compared to the other surgery that can save the children's lives. Under this case, then, we tell you the children's lives should be prioritized. And since both sides agree that the children's lives are the most important actor in the debate, we tell you that medical professionals make decisions. This also refutes Op-Whip's claim that medical professionals are not good because they would not listen to the children. Good, because children are not good actors to decide what they want for themselves, and that doctors are able to objectively evaluate what is good for the children in order to maximize the increase or chances of survival on our side of the house. Let me summarize, but then they say, the state does not get to interfere. But we literally told you there are instances where it is extremely severe, it is extremely dire that the state has to interfere. Let me give you an analogy. Let's say I'm a parent and I abuse my children, and then the state comes in and be like, no, we have to separate you. And I'm the parent, I'm gonna quote them, well, you know what I think? I've seen them grow 10 years along the line. I'm their parent and I'm very close to them. I know what they want, and I should have parental custody over it. I think this does not make sense. Because the state also interfere with this, and the state has the ability to interfere because they know what is best for the children, and the state has the incentive, and they also have the capacity to do this. For this reason, very proud to propose.
All right. Thank you very much, Gov Reply, for the speech. Thank you, everyone, for the debate overall. You guys can cross the house now. And I don't know if you need to leave the room. I think you